You step through the front door after another exhausting day, only to realize that your sacrifices are invisible. For years, you carried the weight of the house, the bills, and the unspoken promise to hold your family together. Yet, when your sister returned home, everything that was yours, your room, your car, even your peace, was quietly taken away. They thought you would stay silent, but deep inside, something was changing. This is not just a story about duty. It is about discovering the courage to finally choose yourself. What would you do if it happened to you? If you find strength in stories like this, a gentle like and subscribe will keep you close to every journey we share. You arrive home with your body aching, every step heavier than the last. 12 hours at work leave you drained, yet the real exhaustion doesn't come from the labor itself, it comes from knowing that the moment you walk through that door, your role changes from employee to provider, caretaker, and silent pillar. The familiar scent of your mother's rose air freshener fills the hallway, but instead of comfort, it presses down on you like a reminder of all the years you've carried her world on your shoulders. The stack of bills waiting on the entry table greets you before she does, each envelope whispering the same truth. No matter how much you give, it will never be enough. You try to breathe, to steady yourself with a small trick your father once taught you: count backward from 10, whenever the storm inside becomes too loud. But storms have a way of returning, don't they? They circle back, sometimes softer, sometimes stronger, yet always there. Tonight, the storm is quiet, but its silence feels more dangerous. Your mother's voice calls from the living room, casual, expectant. "Did you bring my prescriptions?" Close quote. It isn't a question born of gratitude. It's a routine demand. You answer yes, because you always do, and place the small paper bag on the counter. Her show continues on the television, its glow painting her face in cold shadows. She doesn't look at you, but her words carry weight. "My back hurts today. Make me some tea." So you boil the kettle, your hands moving out of habit. The paycheck you cashed earlier still sits folded in your bag. Thin paper, fragile ink, yet it represents every ounce of your time, traded for money that vanishes almost instantly into mortgages, medications, and utilities. You place it next to the overdue notice, the numbers cutting into you like sharp edges. $1,150. Due in 3 days. You add 50 more for the inevitable late fee, because you've already learned how this story goes. Your eyes wander to the drawer where an old offer letter still hides the Denver promotion that could have changed everything. A $20,000 raise, a chance to lead, to finally build something of your own. But that path closed the moment you heard your mother's trembling voice at the funeral, your father's words echoing from memory. "She needs you right now. Just until she gets back on her feet." 5 years later, those words still chain you here, in a house that feels less like home, and more like a weight pressing on your chest. When you set her tea down, she doesn't thank you. Instead, her eyes drift toward the framed wedding photo of your sister, Tessa. She touches the silver frame, her voice soft with admiration. If only you had Tessa's sunny disposition. She never gets bogged down by the little things. The little things: mortgage, utilities, groceries, prescriptions. You hold your breath, keeping your voice even. Tessa doesn't have to worry about the little things. But your mother's gaze sharpens. "Your father would be so proud of how you take care of me." That line, her trump card, lands exactly where she knows it will. Between your heart and spine, twisting like something you cannot remove. You excuse yourself, head for the shower, and stare at the reflection staring back at you. The dark circles under your eyes, the practical ponytail, the woman who has been living not for herself, but for others. "Just a few more months," you whisper. "Just a few more months, and I'll start over." Yet even that small dream feels fragile. Because deep down, you know starting over requires more than time, it requires a choice you haven't been brave enough to make. And here, as you look at your own weary face, do you ever wonder, if you were in this place, would you stay silent or finally walk away? Your phone rings, breaking the silence. Tessa's name flashes across the screen, bright and eager. For a second, you almost let it go to voicemail. But you answer, because that's what you do. Her voice bubbles through with excitement. "Guess what? We're coming home." The word home lands like a stone in your stomach. She explains Dylan lost his job, the magazine downsized, but it's only temporary. Until they get back on their feet. That phrase, your father's words, again burns into your ears. First it was Mom. Now it's Tessa. Everyone always getting back on their feet while you remain flat on your back, crushed beneath their weight. When you ask if Mom knows, Tessa laughs. Yes. She's thrilled. Says it'll be just like old times. And in that instant, you hear footsteps approaching your door. Your mother, smiling in a way she hasn't in months, eager to talk to her beloved daughter. She grabs the phone from your hand, her voice transformed. "Tessa, sweetheart. I've already started planning." Yes, Felicia's thrilled too. But you're not. You stand in silence, watching your mother glow with joy she hasn't shown you in years. And when the phone is handed back, you can barely hold it. Tessa continues, her words like knives wrapped in honey. This weekend, Dylan already has some leads. Oh, and Mom said we could use your room, it just makes sense since it's bigger. You don't mind, right? You're barely home anyway with all those hours you work. The world goes quiet. Your room, the one place that is yours alone, taken without hesitation. The motto of your family repeats in your head. Don't be selfish. But selfishness, you realize, is a label they only ever placed on you. You whisper into the phone, I'll clear out my things. And when the call ends, you stand in the center of your room, surrounded by the life you've built in small fragments, preparing to be erased. Through the window, you see your neighbor watering her garden. She waves, her eyes kind, but you barely manage to lift your hand in return. In that moment, clarity strikes. You are not a daughter, not a sister, you are a resource. And when you're empty, they will simply move on. The thought should bring sadness, but instead it brings something else. Something quieter. A small spark of freedom, hidden beneath the layers of obligation. That weekend, the doorbell rings. Tessa stands there with open arms, perfume clouding your senses, Dylan behind her with suitcases that cost more than your entire wardrobe. She hugs you tightly, squealing about how much she's missed you. But your eyes stay fixed on the expensive luggage of a man who supposedly just lost his job. Your mother rushes forward, glowing with energy you haven't seen in years. There's my girl. Close quote, she says, pulling Tessa into her arms. Not girls. Never plural. Always singular. Always Tessa. And you stand in the doorway, watching as your room, the space you paid for, the space you filled, becomes theirs. And maybe, just maybe, if stories like this remind you of truths you've lived through or feared, staying with us by gently tapping like or subscribe will make sure you don't walk this journey alone. The weekend came faster than you expected, and with it the sharp, impatient chime of the doorbell 3 times in quick succession, a rhythm you could never mistake. Tessa had arrived. You opened the door, and before you could even catch your breath, she was already in your arms, her perfume clouding the hallway, her voice bubbling with excitement. Behind her stood Dylan, dragging 3 suitcases that gleamed with polished leather, each one heavy, each one expensive, the kind of luggage that spoke of comfort rather than hardship. For someone who had supposedly lost his job, he carried himself without a hint of loss. And as you stepped back to let them in, your mother appeared from the living room, her eyes bright, her face transformed with joy you hadn't seen since your father was alive. There's my girl, close quote, she exclaimed, her arms wrapping tightly around Tessa, her voice trembling with happiness. Not girls. Not daughters. Only Tessa. And you, standing nearby, felt yourself dissolving into the background, invisible in the very house you had worked so hard to preserve. It didn't take long for the shift to become official. Your room, the one place you had called your own, was already taken. Last night you had packed boxes quietly, stacking them in the cramped guest room that now swallowed your life whole. Dylan rolled the first suitcase across the threshold, and your mother announced, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, everything is ready. Felicia already moved. The words struck you harder than you expected, not because you hadn't known, but because of how easily they erased you. You stood there, watching, realizing that in this house, your place had never really been yours at all. And in that moment, you couldn't help wondering, if your own home can be taken from you so casually, what would you do if it were your story? Dinner that night was pot roast with all the trimmings, the same meal your father had once loved, the same scent that used to carry warmth into your bones. But tonight, as the aroma filled the kitchen, it clung differently. It wasn't comfort, it was favoritism dressed as tradition. You stir the pot slowly, asking yourself quietly whether a house built on sacrifice could still be called home if your presence was treated as expendable. Across the table, laughter bubbled from Tessa and Dylan as they spoke of redecorating, of turning your old room into something more their style. And then came your mother's voice, calm but heavy with authority. Dylan will need your car on Monday. You can take the bus. You froze, the spoon slipping slightly in your hand. I have meetings across town. I need my car, close quote, you answered, trying to steady your voice. She sighed, disappointment etched deep into her face. Can't you think of someone besides yourself? Your sister needs us right now. The word selfish was never spoken, but you felt it hanging between you, sharp as glass. And inside, a crack began to form, because you knew this pattern too well. Every sacrifice demanded, every boundary erased, every part of you consumed until there was nothing left. And as you looked around the table, did you feel, like I did, that familiar question rising? How much longer could anyone endure being treated as if their worth existed only in what they could give? But the wait didn't stop there. Later that evening, as if assigning tasks for the week, your mother added lightly, I already told the landlord you'd cover the lease, just until they get settled. Casual words, spoken with no hesitation, words that gave away your earnings as if they were hers to distribute. And you sat in silence, the reality pressing harder with each passing second. They didn't ask. They assumed. Because in their eyes, you weren't a daughter, weren't a sister, you were a safety net, a bank, a resource. That night in the guest room, surrounded by boxes that whispered of everything you had lost, you opened your laptop. An email glowed on the screen, dated weeks before, from Tessa to your mother. They had planned this. The job loss, the move, the return, everything had been decided long ago. And in your mother's reply, one line carved itself into you. Don't worry about Felicia. She'll understand. She always does. You read it again, until the truth was undeniable. They never intended to consider you. They only intended to use you. And in that silence, you asked yourself, if you were me, would you still have said nothing? Or would you already have packed your bags and gone? Through the thin walls came the sound of Tessa's laughter. We should redecorate, close quote, she said proudly to Dylan. Sell the old furniture and buy something more a style. Furniture you had chosen, paid for, lived with, suddenly reduced to outdated relics. You press your hand against the wall, not to silence them, but to steady yourself, to keep the storm from breaking too soon. And beneath the ache, something flickered, something frighteningly close to hope. Because maybe freedom doesn't come with a bang. Maybe it comes with a whisper that says you can still choose. The next morning, your mother handed you a grocery list twice as long as usual, a calculator beside it, flashing a total that devoured nearly half your paycheck. We'll need more now, close quote, she said simply, not looking at you, already confident you would carry the cost. You stared at the numbers, each digit a reminder of how far you had been pushed, each line another chain fastening itself around your chest. But even as you looked, a thought began to bloom. Chains can be broken. And maybe this was the moment you started to see how. At the bank, the manager confirmed what you already suspected: you were the only one making deposits into the family account. You walked out into the automare, your phone heavy in your hand, and dialed Marcus, the colleague who had once told you about an opening in Knoxville. Is the office still open? Close quote, you asked, your voice trembling. And his answer, sure and immediate, struck like a lifeline. For you. Absolutely. That evening, while your mother set out plans for a welcome barbecue and Tessa laughed in the kitchen, you slipped into your old room. The closet was already filled with your sister's clothes. The desk had been pushed aside. But under the floorboard, right where you had left it, lay the envelope, $5,000 in cash, your father's whispered advice alive in your hands. Always keep something for yourself. You held it tightly, guilt and relief battling inside you, and for the first time in years you allowed yourself to breathe. And as you sat there in the fading light, you realized that stories like this don't just belong to you. They belong to anyone who has ever been told to give until nothing remained, to anyone who has wondered if love and obligation had blurred into chains. And maybe, if this part of the story makes you pause, if it makes you think about where your own boundaries lie, then you already understand why a gentle like or subscribe isn't just about following a channel, it's about reminding yourself that you are not alone, that others have felt this weight too, and found a way forward. That night stretched longer than most. The guest room felt smaller than ever, its thin walls pressing in on you as though trying to crush the last bit of air from your lungs. Through those walls you could hear laughter drifting from what was once your bedroom. The sound carried not only their joy, but also the echo of everything you had lost. Each laugh landed heavier than the one before, and though you told yourself to ignore it, your body stiffened, unable to rest. When you finally closed your eyes, you saw only the email again, the cruel simplicity of those words. She'll understand. She always does. The next morning, you walked into the kitchen to find your mother and Tessa sitting together, their voices lowered, but their smiles unguarded. A pile of papers sat between them, mortgage statements and lists of expenses, all with your handwriting, all proof of what you had carried alone. Tessa's manicured fingers traced the numbers like they were merely curiosities, rather than the sacrifices of your years. She looked up at you with that bright smile, the one that always came just before she asked for something. You don't mind, do you? It's just temporary, until Dylan gets back on his feet. That phrase again, always temporary, always waiting for someone else to recover while you never had the chance to rest. You bit down the words building inside you, choosing silence because silence was easier. But even later, as the evening stretched on, you excused yourself and slipped into the house. The noise of laughter and music faded as you closed the door to your old bedroom. You stood there in silence, taking in the sight of your desk shoved against the wall, your books stacked in uneven piles, your belongings displaced to make room for her things. It looked less like a home and more like a hotel room, a space scrubbed of your presence. Kneeling on the floor, you pried open the loose board again and touched the envelope of cash. It was still there, still whole, your secret lifeline. For the first time, you allowed yourself to imagine what it would feel like to leave, to use that money not for them, but for you. The thought scared you. It also thrilled you. You replaced the board and sat back against the wall, your hands trembling not from fear but from possibility. And as you sat there, you whispered to yourself, maybe freedom doesn't need permission. On Monday, you found yourself driving to the bank instead of eating lunch. The manager scrolled through the account records, confirming what you had long suspected. Every deposit had come from you. Every dollar earned, every cent saved, it was your name that kept the account alive. Has been for quite some time, close quote, he remarked casually, not realizing how much weight his words carried. You thanked him, though the gratitude caught in your throat. On your way back, you called Marcus. That position in Knoxville, is it still available? Close quote. The answer came swift and sure. Absolutely. That night, the house buzzed with plans for the week, Tessa talking about redecorating, your mother discussing how to split bills, always assuming you would shoulder more. You sat quietly, their voices blurring into background noise, your mind already mapping an escape. Later, in the privacy of your guest room, you sketched out a plan. Utilities transferred. Mail forwarding set. Savings secured. A moving truck scheduled. With each detail, the chains tightened and then loosened, as though the act of planning itself was the first step toward breaking free. Through the thin window, you saw Tessa and Dylan on the porch swing your father once built. They laughed together, their phones glowing in the dark. Your mother brought them drinks, hovering like the sun over flowers. You stood at the window watching, your face calm, your heart steady. They had no idea what you were planning. And maybe that was the first time in years that the power felt like it belonged to you. The following week, when you arrived at work, you carried yourself differently. Lighter, though no one else would have known why. Marcus caught your eye across the room and gave you a nod, a silent reminder that you had options, that life existed beyond the walls of sacrifice. You held that thought close, like a flame cupped against the wind. But home, of course, was not so easily quiet. That evening, as you walked through the door, your mother handed you another list, longer this time, filled with groceries and expenses, her voice calm as she said, "We'll need more now, with 4 people here." She slid the paper toward you, her eyes already moving past, certain you would comply. You held the paper without replying, your silence sharper than any protest. For the first time, she seemed to hesitate, as though realizing you might not be the well she could draw from forever. And in that hesitation, you felt something shift. It wasn't victory. It wasn't revenge. It was simply clarity. You had been carrying them for years, bending until you nearly broke. But no more. The thought of Knoxville, of a new beginning, of a space that belonged to you alone, pulsed like a quiet promise. That night, lying awake in the narrow bed of the guest room, you let yourself imagine the future. Mornings without demands, evenings without criticism, weekends not filled with errands for someone else. You imagined planting a garden, reading in peace, building a life where your worth wasn't measured by sacrifice. And in the silence of that night, you asked yourself, and perhaps even the listener beside you, if you were given the same chance, would you take it? Would you walk away from the weight of obligation and step into the unknown, even if it meant leaving behind those who claimed they needed you most? The day of reckoning came quietly, almost disguised as ordinary. Morning light fell through the blinds, the same way it always had, but something inside you felt different. You rose earlier than usual, your steps steady, your heart calm. The moving truck had been booked, the boxes hidden neatly in the guest room, the documents signed. Everything was prepared. For once, the future wasn't something you dreamed about in silence. It was something you were holding firmly in your own hands. At breakfast, your mother was making her list again. The calculator sat beside her, numbers displayed without hesitation, her pen scratching across the page with certainty. Tessa walked in with a cup of coffee, her laughter bright, Dylan trailing behind her with casual ease. They all spoke of plans, of bills, of what you could do next to keep things running smoothly. You sat quietly, listening, your face calm, but your mind already elsewhere. When you placed your spoon down, the sound was soft but final. "I've taken care of the next mortgage payment," close quote, you said evenly. "After that, it's no longer my responsibility." The room went silent, the air suddenly heavy. Your mother looked up, her pen pausing mid-word. "What do you mean, no longer your responsibility?" Close quote. Her voice carried disbelief, as though the very idea was impossible. You met her gaze. "I've been paying for everything for years. The mortgage, the utilities, the groceries. I'm done." The words didn't tremble. They didn't ask for permission. They simply were. Tess laughed awkwardly, as if to lighten the moment. "Felicia, don't be dramatic. We all know you'll keep things going. You always do." But you didn't smile. No, not this time. The silence that followed was sharper than any argument. Dylan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting from your face to the floor. Your mother's lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. And then, finally, she whispered, "We need you, Felicia. We've always needed you." You stood, the chair legs scraping against the floor, the sound like a line being drawn. "That's the problem. You don't see me, you only see what I provide. I was never your daughter. I was your solution." The weight of those words filled the kitchen. Your mother's face crumpled, her eyes wide with something between guilt and denial. Tessa shook her head, her voice rising. You're heartless. After everything we've done for you. Close quote. A bitter laugh escaped you, one you hadn't meant to release. Everything you've done for me. Tell me what that is, Tessa. Was it taking my room? My car? Or was it watching me work myself to exhaustion while you lived untouched by responsibility? Close quote. For a moment, no one spoke. The truth sat there, undeniable, refusing to be brushed aside. And you realize that sometimes silence is not submission, it's a gathering storm. And when it breaks, it cannot be ignored. You left the kitchen then, walking to your old room one last time. The air inside smelled faintly of Tessa's perfume, but beneath it lingered your own memories, nights spent studying, mornings spent dreaming of something greater. You knelt at the loose floorboard and retrieved the envelope, the $5,000 that had waited patiently for this day. You slipped it into your bag, your movements calm, your heart steady. This wasn't theft. This was reclamation. By the time the moving truck arrived, the sun had risen higher, its light casting sharp angles across the yard. The driver asked for your signature, and you gave it, your hand firm. Tessa appeared at the door, her voice laced with shock. What's going on? You're leaving. Close quote. You looked at her, really looked, and for the first time you saw not the sister who had been favored, but the woman who had grown accustomed to taking. Yes, close quote, you said simply. I'm leaving. Her eyes widened, her disbelief raw. You can't just walk away from family. The words landed, familiar but hollow now. You stepped closer, your voice quiet but unyielding. Family doesn't mean draining one person until nothing is left. Family doesn't mean erasing someone's life so you can live more comfortably. If that's your definition, then no, I won't carry it anymore. Your mother's voice cracked behind her. Please, think of us. What will we do without you? Close quote. You turned to her, your heart aching, but your resolve unmoved. You'll figure it out. Just like I always had to. The movers began carrying boxes, their footsteps heavy on the floorboards. Each thud felt like punctuation, each lift like the severing of another tie. You watched as years of your life were packed away, not with sorrow, but with relief. And when you finally stepped out onto the porch, the air felt cleaner than it had in years. Neighbors watched from across the street, their faces curious, some sympathetic. Mrs. Henderson waved softly, her eyes kind. She had seen more than most, and her small gesture felt like quiet validation. Your mother stood in the doorway, tears streaking down her face. Tessa hovered beside her, her arms crossed, her anger fully masking her fear. Dylan said nothing at all, his silence speaking louder than any protest. As the truck pulled away, you sat in the passenger seat of your own car, the engine humming beneath you, the road stretching ahead. For the first time in years, the horizon didn't look like a wall. It looked like possibility. And as you drove, you couldn't help but wonder if you were standing where I was, would you have chosen the same? Would you have found the strength to walk away, even knowing the voices behind you would cry selfish, ungrateful, cruel? Or would you have stayed, carrying the weight until there was nothing left of you at all? The city faded in your rearview mirror, and with it, the years of silence, sacrifice, and unseen struggle. Ahead lay Knoxville, a fresh chapter, a space that was wholly yours. You tightened your grip on the wheel, the ache in your chest easing as the miles slipped by. This wasn't running away. This was stepping into a life you had always deserved, but had been too afraid to claim. And as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of gold and crimson, you whispered to yourself the truth you had kept buried for so long. Sometimes the bravest act of